What if I told you that the Boston Celtics' biggest enemy isn't the Milwaukee Bucks or the Miami Heat, that there are three teams that could make the road to back-to-back championships much tougher than it seems? Sounds absurd, right? After all, the Celtics have dominated the regular season, showing consistency, talent, and roster depth. But the playoffs are a completely different game. That's where the pressure rises, weaknesses are exposed, and individual talent can, in fact, be neutralized by an unfavorable tactical matchup. The road to the title is full of traps, and some opponents could become a thorn in the side of Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown's team. But should Celtics fans really be worried? Or is this just media exaggeration, creating narratives to make games more marketable? The fact is, no matter how dominant the Celtics have been so far, there are details that could complicate their journey. The defense has been strong, but certain lineups expose vulnerabilities. The offense flows well, but can it hold up on nights when Tatum or Brown struggle? And perhaps most concerning, the team's mentality. Has Boston truly learned from past mistakes? Or are there still ghosts haunting this squad? The first question we need to answer: is the Boston Celtics truly prepared to face a team as physical as the New York Knicks? When healthy, the Knicks are a real problem for any opponent. They play with relentless intensity, fight for every possession, and have a defense capable of turning a brilliant offense into a nightmare. But what makes this matchup even more intriguing is the contrast in styles. The Boston Celtics, despite being one of the best teams in the NBA, have a dangerous tendency to settle for three-pointers. Against a team that imposes a more physical and chaotic game, that could be an issue. And here lies the heart of the discussion. Can Boston dictate the pace of the game, or will the Knicks turn it into a physical war where the Celtics' individual talent becomes irrelevant? This is a question that deserves more attention because there's a factor few people talk about. Boston struggles against teams that can disrupt its offensive flow, and the Knicks do exactly that. The Knicks' defense is built to frustrate opponents. They clog the paint, contest shots, and force uncomfortable decisions. If Boston isn't willing to embrace the physical battle and find alternatives to its traditional style, the risk of falling to the Knicks' intensity is real. What happens when the threes aren't falling? Does Boston have a reliable plan B? Here's a criticism that few dare to make. Boston has an issue when it comes to offensive aggressiveness. Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown are undeniable talents. But how many times have we seen this team rely too much on perimeter shooting instead of attacking the basket consistently? Against weaker teams, this approach works. But against the Knicks, who thrive on grinding games out and forcing their opponents to adapt, that could be fatal. Another under-discussed factor is fatigue. The Knicks, besides being physical, are a resilient team. They don't give up easily, have depth, and feature players willing to battle for every possession. Boston might find itself pushed to the limit physically, and the big question is, does the roster have enough stamina to sustain this type of fight for 48 minutes? That's why this matchup cannot be underestimated. If the Celtics step on the court expecting their technical superiority to be enough, they might be in for a surprise. The psychological factor also matters. Teams like the Knicks live for these types of battles. They want to impose their will and turn the game into a test of endurance. Boston has to prove it can win in any way necessary. If the three-pointers aren't falling, they need to find another path. If the Knicks' defense tightens up, they must be patient and avoid unnecessary turnovers. Above all, they need to enter the game with the right mindset, ready to fight for every single possession. If the Boston Celtics swept the Pacers in last season's playoffs, why is Indiana still a threat? The answer is simple. That series was much closer than the 4-0 score suggests. Every game was decided by the smallest details, and if Tyrese Haliburton hadn't gotten injured, would we be talking about a sweep or a much more dramatic battle? Now, in the current season, the Pacers continue to prove they don't fear the Celtics. They've already beaten Boston twice in head-to-head matchups and have shown they know how to exploit some of the team's weaknesses. But what's really concerning is Indiana's rotation. Unlike many teams that rely solely on their starters, the Pacers have a roster that keeps the intensity high for all 48 minutes. They run constantly, play at a fast pace, and capitalize on every mistake their opponent makes. And here's the key issue Boston needs to address. Do the Celtics truly have full control over Indiana, or are they underestimating the danger? Because if there's one team that can turn a comfortable series into a real battle, it's the Pacers. Many might look at last year's sweep and think, the Celtics already proved they're superior. But is it really that simple? The reality is that the 4-0 was misleading. Every game was tight until the final minutes, and Boston needed clutch performances to close them out. The Pacers have never been an easy team to face. They may not have the media spotlight that other Eastern Conference teams do, but they're a tough opponent because they play without fear, and that's where the danger lies. The Celtics have a recent history of making certain playoff series more complicated than they should be. Remember the series against the Atlanta Hawks in 2023? Or even against the Miami Heat in 2022 and 2023? Boston sometimes falls into a comfort zone and only reacts when the problem has already escalated. If they do that against Indiana, they might pay the price. The Pacers' fast-paced game is one of their biggest weapons. They lead the NBA in transition points, something that has historically troubled Boston. If the Celtics fail to control the pace and allow Indiana to dictate the tempo, things could spiral out of control. Beyond that, Indiana has something few teams can replicate: a bench that truly contributes. Obi Toppin, Benedict Mathurin, Jaylen Smith, and TJ McConnell bring energy, defense, and scoring whenever they step on the court. This means that even when Halliburton and Pascal Siakam take a break, the team remains competitive. Speaking of Siakam, he's a new piece that Boston has yet to face in a playoff series. The NBA champion with the Raptors in 2019 has already proven he can perform in big games and could be a game changer for Indiana. He adds experience, versatility, and a strong presence in the paint, an area that has always been a concern for the Celtics. On paper, Boston is still the favorite. They have more talent, more experience, and a more balanced team, but basketball isn't played on paper. If the Celtics come in relaxed, assuming they can repeat last year's sweep without much trouble, Indiana will be ready to surprise them. There's also a factor that few are talking about: pressure. The Celtics are coming off a championship and are now the team to beat. Every opponent wants to prove something against Boston. The Pacers, on the other hand, have nothing to lose. They can play freely, without the weight of expectations, and that could be a key advantage in close games. So the big question remains: will the Celtics prove they've truly learned from past mistakes and dominate this series from start to finish? Or will they allow Indiana to turn this matchup into an absolute nightmare? Now, let's talk about the team that could be the Celtics' worst nightmare: the Cleveland Cavaliers. And the question is simple: can Boston win a playoff series against the best defensive team in the East? Why is this question so important? Simple. Cleveland has all the tools to turn this series into a living hell for the Celtics. A suffocating defense, a dominant front court, and the mentality of a team that believes they are the real ones to beat in the East. While most teams step onto the court against Boston just trying to survive, the Cavs play as if they are the favorites. And that changes everything. Cleveland's defensive system is a wall. With Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen protecting the rim, the Cavs have one of the best defenses in the NBA. Their front court is a nightmare for teams that rely on attacking the paint and scoring close to the basket. In other words, Boston would have to live and die by the three-pointer. But what if the threes don't fall? That's the real danger. When the Celtics face teams that limit their inside game, their main alternative is perimeter shooting. But the playoffs aren't just about stats, and what works in the regular season doesn't always translate to a 7-game series. If Boston has an off night from deep, Cleveland can take control quickly, and the Cavs aren't just about defense. Donovan Mitchell is one of the most explosive players in the NBA. He has already proven in past playoffs that he can dominate entire games and carry his team in the toughest moments. If he gets hot in a series, Boston could have serious trouble containing him. Another point that no one talks about: Cleveland has a physical, patient playing style that forces opponents to play at their tempo. Unlike a team like the Pacers, who want to speed things up, the Cavs prefer a slower, half-court game. That could be a problem for the Celtics, who are at their best when they control the pace. The worst-case scenario for Boston would be entering this series expecting talent alone to solve problems. Because Cleveland is not a team that backs down. They play without fear against any opponent and have already proven they can beat the Celtics, as they have in the regular season. If Boston starts relying solely on outside shooting and struggles to find solutions when things get tough, Cleveland can force ugly, grinding games. And the playoffs are all about adjustments. If the Celtics don't adapt quickly, they could end up suffocated by the Cavs' defense and frustrated on offense. Another key factor is fatigue. Jayson, Tatum, and Jaylen Brown will have to fight for every point in the paint. The wear and tear of facing two elite rim protectors could take a toll as the series progresses. Cleveland's defense is designed to make opponents feel every possession. Boston has depth, but do they have the stamina for a physically and mentally exhausting series? Boston has more talent, more experience, and a more complete team. But if they come in unprepared, Cleveland has everything it takes to turn this series into a nightmare. The Celtics must avoid falling into the trap of a slow, physical game where the Cavs thrive.